Marhaba and welcome to Free Palestine Pod, the podcast. I'm Lama Bazzari.
And I'm Lina Hadi. Each week, we will bring you in-depth commentary from Palestine.
Let's talk Palestine. Today on the show, we welcome Diana Buttu, a well-recognized Palestinian-Canadian lawyer, analyst, activist, and former legal advisor and spokesperson to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Marhaba, Diana, and welcome to Free Palestine Pod. Let's talk
Ahlan.
Palestine.
Thank you, Lama. Thank you, and thank you, Lina. Thank you, Ahlan.
So, Diana, the last time we were together was in June in Geneva, Switzerland, speaking about at the Amnesty International event, speaking about the 300-page report finally claiming that Israel is an apartheid. And since then, the situation has worsened dramatically. Can you explain why, despite the fact that the most credible human rights organization in the world submitted a 278-page report saying that Israel is an apartheid state, why is the situation actually worsening?
That's a great question, Lina, and thank you both for having me. I think the situation has gotten worse because of the fact that the Israelis have never been stopped to do anything. Let's back up for just a second. When it comes to these reports, these apartheid reports, there is now a wall of consensus among human rights organizations around the world. But that wall of consensus, actually, the first brick of it, the first block of it, was actually started by Palestinian organizations back in 2001 at the Durban conference, the Durban Anti-Racism Conference in South Africa. And what's happened is that since that time, it's only gotten worse. And it's only now that the world is waking up and seeing this apartheid that we have been living under for decades. Now, the reason that it's now getting just that much worse is because Israel, for all of these years, it's never seen a red light. It's never had any sanctions placed upon it. It's never seen that the world is telling it to stop. We just get these small little initiatives here and there of trying to boycott settlement activities, boycott settlement products, etc. But this wholesale big boycott that South Africa faced is not being faced by Israel. And so the short answer is it's getting worse because it can get worse, because Israel is allowed to get away with murdering Palestinians, with stealing Palestinian land, with demolishing Palestinian homes, with blockading the Gaza Strip, with bombing the Gaza Strip, with demolishing homes even inside 48. It's doing it because it can, and because there's really nobody who's putting the brakes on Israel to actually demand that it stop any of this activity, despite these reports.
I wanted to ask you, Diana, about the elections. I mean, with Benjamin Netanyahu may be set to return to power in one of the most right-wing coalitions in Israel's history, and then an alliance formed with Kahanist Itamar Ben-Gvir's religious Zionist bloc, which is a huge boost to the far-right religious movement within Israel. Israel continues to veer to the far right, and essentially fascism is becoming mainstream. What are your thoughts?
You exactly said it correctly, which is fascism is mainstream. Itamar Ben-Gvir, just for people who may not know, I'll give you just a little bit of history on him. Itamar Ben-Gvir he's a lawyer who made his claim to fame, his initial claim to fame, by stealing from the Mercedes car. They used to have the Mercedes logo on the car. And he stole it from Yitzhak Rabin, the late Israeli prime minister. He stole that from the prime minister's car. And he came out and said, I've stolen this. Next, we'll get him. It was only a few weeks later that Yitzhak Rabin ended up being assassinated. And so Ben-Gvir's rise to fame has been basically by supporting and defending Israeli Jewish terrorists who have attacked Palestinians. He was the lawyer who defended the family of settlers that burned the Dawabshi family, killing a 1.5-year-old boy named Ali Dawabshi and his parents, because settlers had torched his house. And his whole political positioning has been about ethnic cleansing. In fact, another thing that many people don't know about him is for one of the Israeli holidays, which is called Purim, he actually dressed up as Baruch Goldstein, the man who massacred 29 Palestinians in 1994. He dressed up as him. And he said, I'm dressing up as him because Baruch Goldstein is my hero. He's a disciple of Meir Kahane. He's a person who openly calls for ethnic cleansing. He's a fascist. And before anybody tells you any differently, he actually campaigned on this fascist platform. He didn't campaign on a lighter, softer Ben Gvir. No, he campaigned on an entirely fascist platform. And as we're now seeing the poll results come in, the vast majority of his support didn't come from the settler movement. It actually came from young Israelis who are not living in settlements. They like him because he is a fascist. And this is where Israel has long been headed. Now, it's easy to just dismiss everybody and say, well, it's just that Israel's been going down this path for a long time. But as somebody who lives here, I can tell you how frightening it is to have somebody like him who not only lives in your midst, but who normalizes racism, who normalizes ethnic cleansing, and who is normalizing all of this violent behavior in my neighborhood alone, which is an Arab neighborhood where there are a few Israeli families. There are a number of people who voted for Ben Gvir, as the poll results have now shown.
Okay, wow, that is extremely disturbing. In light of that, do you think that what people like myself and you and Lema are advocating for, which is basic rights for the Palestinians, not even human or civil at this point, but just basic rights, do you think that this is achievable under this new government?
No. I think the big push that we have to keep making is for BDS. I think that Israel needs to be seeing a red light finally. And if anything, the inclusion of Ben Gvir in this government should be enough for the world to give Israel a red light, to give them a stop sign. Enough. I'm afraid it won't, though, Lena. I'm afraid it won't, because they've always found ways to rationalize this type of racist behavior. Just to give you a couple of examples, many years ago, back in 2009, we saw the rise of a man named Avigdor Lieberman. Avigdor Lieberman is a settler who went on to become Israel's foreign minister, despite the fact that he also said things like Palestinians should be drowned in the sea, that they should have their heads chopped off. As a foreign minister, who said that Palestinians should be stripped of their citizenship. And we saw that the world dealt with Avigdor Lieberman. We also saw that Smotrich, the running mate for Ben Gvir, there are two people running together on one party. Here's a man who said that Ahed Tamimi should have the very least, had a bullet shot in her kneecap, if not killed. And he went on to become the transportation minister, which people around the world dealt with him as well. So as much as I would love to see that Ben Gvir and his calls for ethnic cleansing and his fascist stance is going to lead, or should lead, to a full-on boycott and sanctions against Israel, I'm afraid that it won't, because they'll just find ways of rationalizing that behavior.
The safe grassroots-led activism that triggered one of the largest, I would say, Free Palestine transnational solidarity movements in history also managed incredibly to unite Palestinians from the river to the sea. How can we continue to scale this impact within Palestine and on a global stage?
Lema, I'm going to say something that is the obvious, but it's kind of controversial. We've always been united. We have always been united. It doesn't matter whether you are whether a person's in the diaspora, whether, my sisters, the two of you are my sisters in the diaspora, or my sisters and brothers who are in Gaza or in Jerusalem or in the West Bank, or you name it. We've always been united. What Israel has always tried to do is to try to highlight how not united we are, but we've always been united. And that's what terrifies them. That's exactly what terrifies them. There isn't a single action, Lemma, that happens anywhere around Palestine that doesn't have a ricochet effect in another part of Palestine. I'll give you an example. In 2014, when the Great Return March was happening and Israel was gunning down Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, they were shooting at them. They built, just so you can understand how sick the mentality is, Lemma, they grabbed dirt and they built like hills. They built a hill in front of Gaza so that they would be able to lie on their stomachs and shoot down into Gaza. It's sick. While they were doing that and they massacred Palestinians in Gaza, we saw that there were protests happening in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, in Haifa, and in Nazareth. I still have a scar from one of the times that I was hit by the police during one of those protests. Whether it's then or whether it's whatever happens in the West Bank, we see a ricochet effect in Gaza. What we've just been seeing the past week with Israel attacking Shafat and attacking Nablus, you see protests happening in Nazareth, in Haifa, in Gaza. It's always been there. But what they try to do is they try to cover it up and they try to create some sort of distinction like, oh, you from Nazareth, you're not like the people in Gaza. I'm exactly like my sisters in Gaza. Or you from Nazareth, you're not like the people in Ramallah. I am exactly like the people in Ramallah. And you in the diaspora are exactly like me. That's what they are trying to push us to. They're trying to create these fissures and they're trying to create division, and we don't have division, and that's what makes them crazy. How can we continue to build upon it, continue doing what we've been doing for all of these years? Now, if you look around in other movements around the world, there have been attempts to try to extinguish people and language and movements, and the Israelis have tried. Believe me, they've tried. But if you let's look at this most simple example, which is Nazareth, right? Nazareth, the largest city inside 48, the largest Palestinian city inside 48. Israel has done its best to try to change everything from our language to our culture to you name it. Here we are 75 years later. We are surviving, and despite what they are doing, despite them, not because of them, despite them, we are thriving and will continue to thrive. So their attempts to try to crush us haven't worked, and they know it, and we should never let it get into our heads that there's been anything other than unity all of these years. That's why I don't really like the term unity and Intifada. We've always been united. We have always been united. We've always been one people, and we will always be one people, and that's what freaks them out.
That's excellent. I mean, you're absolutely right. We have always been united, and we've somehow survived 74 years and going. You are absolutely right, Diana. Absolutely. On that note, there are so many people, and when I mean people, all ages and sizes, and Palestinians all around the world, including inside Palestine, who are wondering, myself included, although I've asked you this before, if you would ever reconsider joining the PA.
At this point, no. The problem for me, Lena, is that the PA has become a shadow of its former self. And what do I mean by that? It was supposed to be only for 5 years. It was supposed to be temporary. And it was supposed to be that stepping stone so that we could then create something bigger, better, brighter. And it's no longer that. It's now in September, it'll be 30 years that the PA has existed. If you think of anything, think of an article of clothing that you might have. A piece of clothing, it doesn't quite look the same, doesn't quite fit the same after 30 years. And it's not supposed to either. I mean, I hope it would, but it's not supposed to. And that's what the PA has become. I'm being gentle on them by just saying that it's just a shadow of its former self. It's actually become one of the obstacles, Lena, to our liberation because of the way that both Israel wanted it to be and the way that the international donor community has turned it into. They've made it so that the PA is running around scrambling to find funds. The donors pay for the PA to survive. And the only way that the donors pay for the PA to survive is if Israel's happy with it. And so it's become this creature that shouldn't be around any longer. Now, That said, I do think that we need to reinvigorate our own national movement, the PLO, so that we do have a sustainability and a survivability that goes beyond these people who are currently leading it. Right now, if you look at I don't know the exact average age, Lena, but I think it's in its 70s for the PLO. I don't know the exact average age, but these are generally men in their 70s. That's not sustainable. And as I just said, we're united. We are one. There's been attempts to try to divide us, and those attempts are not working. But we need to take that extra step and latch onto our leadership and create our leadership that is representative of us in terms of where we are in geography, where we are in ideology, and where we are in time, and where we are in generations. So the fact that we have primarily men in their 70s leading needs to change. And we need to see a much more younger, vibrant, energetic leadership that isn't afraid to move away from Oslo. In fact, what's interesting now, Lena, is that if you look at opinion polls, none of the young people support Oslo anymore. I'm not sure if there's any old people who support it either, but definitely not any of the younger people. And the tragedy for us has been that here we are we haven't had elections in any sphere, 2006. So if you are, with the exception of municipal elections, so if you were born 1987 or later, you've never been able to vote in any Palestinian elections for anything, not just PA, but for the PLO, for the organizations. It's just, that needs to end. That needs to end. Would I work on that side of things? Absolutely. I think it's imperative for all of us to be working on that and to be demanding a greater say and to be seizing control of our leadership.
I'd like you to just take us through your thoughts about the worsening situation on the ground in Jenin, in Khalil, in Nablus. I mean, you have a young generation, as you mentioned, that only know the occupation, and they have nothing to lose. So what are your thoughts on the way forward, and also vis-a-vis the new Israeli elections?
You know, Lema, it's not even just one generation that only knows occupation. It's been in the West Bank, we're heading into the third generation that has only lived under military occupation. In 48, we're at the fourth generation that has only lived under some form of Israeli rule. And that's terrifying. Now, for this younger generation, it's even worse than that. If you look at Gaza, 58% of the people who live in Gaza were born after the siege was imposed. 58% were born after 2007. The fact that the siege, the blockade has become normalized for them should be terrifying everybody, because it's not normal. And so the worsening situation on the ground is that Israel's getting away with it. Israel's getting away with this blockade on kids, because that's what it is. It's a blockade on kids. Israel's getting away with gunning down Palestinians in their cities, towns, villages, homes. Israel's getting away with stealing land. And we're seeing people rise up and push back. And we're seeing them rise up and push back because that's the natural reaction that people have. If you are going to steal my house, I'm going to do everything possible to try to stop you from stealing my house. If you're coming to harm me, I'm going to do everything possible to prevent you from harming me. It's not just an issue of self-defense, but also an issue of resisting against. And so Israel shouldn't be surprised by any of that. In fact, they're not surprised. That's the amazing thing, is that they're not surprised by any of this. In their minds, it's always just a question of how do we manage it? How do we manage it? How do we manage it? And the way that they figured out to manage it is to do what they've done since the beginning of this year, which is what I call death by 1,000 cuts. For practically every day since the start of this year to this current day, Israel's killed at least one Palestinian. It's been death by 1,000 cuts, just day after day after day. And with this low grade, day by day, nobody says anything, nobody does anything. It doesn't make the headlines. It's not a huge issue. It's not a huge event. And so they figured out that formula. They figured out the recipe. Put a blockade on kids. Nobody's going to say anything. Keep it going for 15 years. And kill Palestinians on a day by day by day by day basis in the hopes that somehow we give up and we just abandon our cause. But they don't know us. We're not going to give up. We're not giving up. By now, they should have figured that out, but there's a little bit of denseness that comes to Israel and Israelis. We're not giving up. The fact that, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that we're still holding on, the fact that we are surviving, the fact that we keep pushing forward, the fact that we keep persevering, it's not something that we should, I don't want to glorify it. We shouldn't have to be doing this, but we are because we have to in order to survive. So I personally think that the only way that things are going to change is if Israel sees a pushback, and that pushback can come in different forms. It can come in the form that they're seeing now in the West Bank. It can come in the form of BDS, which they're terrified of. It can come in the form of this ostracizing Israel, which they're also terrified of. In fact, they're more terrified of that than anything else, because what Israel wants more than anything else is to be considered to be a normal state. And it's not normal. It's not normal. And so when we push and we advocate for BDS, it's spotlighting that Israel is not normal and shouldn't be treated as normal.
So basically, for all of us that are on the outside, the diaspora, and for those that are close by, they're still diaspora, what exactly can we do? So we're going to push BDS. I'm definitely on that front, pushing the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement. We have so much resistance in Central Europe. We have no existence in the United States, actually. What more can we do? Ostracize Israel? Should we be doing more of that? Should we start hiring cartoon artists? Because I'm even working on a comic book strip. But what else can we do? And this is really what all of the, especially the younger activists, they need advice. They want to know, what else can we do on the ground to help our brothers and sisters inside Palestine who we know are suffering?
One is, don't normalize Israel. That's been one of the big problems, is that for such a long period of time, there's been this push to normalize Israel. And we have to make sure that Israel is not normalized. It's not normal. It's not a normal state. But Lena, you raised a really important question of what more can we do? It's those building blocks. It's there's not going to be one boof and it's gone. It's not going to be a legal knockout. You know this, I know this, and the occupation is over, or that there's going to be a one report and boom, it's done and it's over. It's going to be this cumulative years of cumulative work that you've been doing, that Lema's been doing, that I've been doing, that others have been doing, that our parents did, our grandparents did. And it's just that slow and steady recognition that each step builds upon the other. They will find ways to go around it. They already have. They've already tried to weaponize things like anti-Semitism. They've already tried to demonize the BDS movement. They've tried to target activists, including now we see how they've labeled these 6 organizations and they're trying to get their funding removed. We've seen how they have attacked our leaders and killed them. And we've seen how they've tried to transform the PA. These are all tactics. We know all of this. But our job is to keep forging ahead. And there's little things. For example, we have the World Cup that's happening in Qatar this month and next month. And I would have loved to see that Israelis are not allowed to attend. But instead, they are going to the World Cup because it's Qatar's way of opening a door. Perhaps, I might be wrong, but a way of opening a door so that they can normalize. And we see the normalization attempts that have been happening throughout the Arab world. Again, trying to make it normal. But to build on these things, we need to keep pushing for BDS. We need to keep pushing for ostracizing. We need to keep pushing for the EU-Israel Association Agreement that requires that Israeli products from the settlements be labeled as products from the settlements. We need to be pushing within different areas with different political movements to make sure that Israel's not normalized, to be pushing for ban on products. All of the things that our brothers and sisters in apartheid South Africa did to fight against apartheid are the things that we are doing, and it's gonna need more time. Unlike in apartheid, in South African apartheid, there wasn't a huge lobby group that was pushing back. We have a lobby group that's pushing back against us, but that doesn't mean that we can't win. That doesn't mean that we can't win. My late father was a goalkeeper and also from Nazareth, Lena. I know we have this Nazareth connection. And he always used to say to me, and this has sort of been my motto in life, he used to play soccer and he was a goalkeeper, and he used to say, just because there's a goalkeeper doesn't mean you can't score a goal. And so we have to be the ones who are continually pushing. Yes, they're going to put the biggest, grossest goalkeeper there, but we're going to score that goal. We are.
For listeners who are unfamiliar, what are some of the key obstacles that Palestinians continue to face in their everyday life as a result of the occupation and apartheid policies? And vis-a-vis the different divided communities within Palestine, the 1948 Palestinian community, the occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza. I mean, every set of community has its own web of draconian set of rules that continue to undermine daily life. Can you just let us know, and essentially for listeners who are unfamiliar with the different various draconian set of rules, depending on where you reside within the occupied territories or in 1948?
Yeah, I'll begin with the most draconian, which is Gaza, and then take it from there. So in the Gaza Strip, it's been under a blockade now for 15 years. That's a formal, strict blockade. It's been under some type of closure since the 1990s. Now, what does that mean? It means that for any person or thing to get in or out of the Gaza Strip, they need Israeli permission. So how does that play itself out in practice? We just finished October, the Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and I'll use that as an example. So in the Gaza Strip, Israel has never allowed, neither in the West Bank nor in the Gaza Strip, just that we're clear, they've never allowed any radiation equipment to go to any hospital that's in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip. Never. So what that means is if a woman has breast cancer or any other type of cancer that needs radiation or specialized chemotherapy, that person has to get Israeli permission to be treated in an Israeli hospital or in a hospital in the West Bank. But of course, they can't get treated in the hospital in the West Bank if they need radiation. That can only be done in an Israeli hospital. Now, Israel's not doing us any favors. The family actually has to pay for that medical treatment. It's not as though that Israel's being benevolent or kind. No, the family has to pay for that treatment. So if you think about what life is like for a woman who has breast cancer is normally, if detected early, it's treatable. But for a woman in Gaza, that's a death sentence. Because first she'll need to get an Israeli permit to get to Israel, which isn't always granted. If she is a supporter of Hamas, her brother's a supporter of Hamas, her cousin's a supporter of Hamas, her uncle's a supporter of Hamas, all likelihood is she won't be getting that permit. So if what is normally a treatable type of cancer becomes a death sentence because nothing can go in and she can't come out. Now, add to that this isn't just a question of medical supplies that are coming in. It's everything from building supplies, school supplies, supplies for boats, for when a boat gets ruined. You name it, all of it requires an Israeli permit. And we have this very unique TV show, Lemma, in Palestine that doesn't exist anywhere around the world. It's a TV show that connects families that are divided between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, or families that are divided between 48 and Gaza. I mean, again, like we have a whole show where they get on the camera and they, hi, how are you? How's the family? How's everybody? So Israel's draconian rules mean that for anybody who's in Gaza, They need permission to enter, to exit, to do anything. And that's why we see such low numbers of people who end up exiting. That means that students can't exit to go study in the West Bank or the rest of the world. There have been so many kids who've lost their scholarships because they're not allowed to leave the Gaza Strip because of this blockade, this siege. And women who've died of cancer, treatable cancers, because they can't get the necessary equipment inside Gaza. In the West Bank, it manifests itself the draconian rules manifest itself in a different way. It's everything from not being able to travel, to go between the city in the West Bank and 48, or to go to Jerusalem, or to go to the Gaza Strip. And it also manifests itself in the draconian rules that they use to steal Palestinian land, to then turn that land over to Israeli settlers, to allowing settlers to attack Palestinians with no recourse for those attacks. It also manifests itself in the fact that, again, we have families that are divided, with one spouse living in Jerusalem, another spouse living in the West Bank. And so you see how that set of draconian rules is also very different. And in 48, it's also a different set of rules. Here in 48, which is where I live, there are 60 laws that directly or indirectly discriminate against me. If you look at the education system, there are attempts to block the Arabic language from being taught. There are attempts they actually do stifle expression when it comes to talking about the Nakba. For decades, we were unable to learn the poetry of our national poets, such as Mahmoud Darwish. These were poems that were banned. There are books that are banned. And so for each one and on top of that, in 48, one of the things that you see is that there isn't a single family throughout all of Palestine, actually, that hasn't been affected by the Nakba. There's not one. You can't find one family that hasn't been affected. Not one. Not a single family. And in my own personal case, you've seen that families are divided. That, again, one of the most racist laws on the books is something that's called the law of return, that allows anybody who's Jewish from anywhere around the world to come and, quote, return to Israel. But yet Palestinians who were born here can't. Just, again, to make it personal, my late father had a sister. Her name was Latifa. She was born in Palestine. She was raised in Palestine. She got married in Palestine. She had her first child in Palestine. And in 1948, she fled, like 750,000 Palestinians. And even though she was born in Palestine, raised in Palestine, married here, had her first kid here, she was never able to return to Palestine. She ended up dying in a refugee camp in Jordan. The same is true of Lena's mom. This is what it means to be living as a Palestinian, is that they've weaved together these sets of laws that are draconian, that affect each of the communities in different ways. But the outcome is the same, which is Jewish supremacy. It's superior rights for Jews and no rights for Palestinians.
That's definitely a recurring theme that I'm hearing over and over right now, is Jewish supremacy. I feel very uncomfortable even saying the words, just because I know we're immediately going to be attacked with anti-Semitism, even for just saying that. I can't thank you enough for joining us. I know it's very difficult on the ground, no matter what part of Palestine anyone is in, and I understand that Gaza is a case that is just atrocious beyond even belief.
Thank you for joining us this week on Free Palestine Pod. Subscribe, like, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.
And be sure to come back next week for a new episode of Free Palestine Pod. Let's talk Palestine.